think that's better. Okay.
Okay.
Are we good on the first one, or do you want to redo the first one?
Might as well. There was a couple little pops. It's not that big, but yeah,
Okay.
just start over.
Okay.
You okay?
Yeah, it's rolling.
Sometimes coaches become attracted to the really good kids, leave the others behind. How does the coach make those connections with all those kids, make them all feel special?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a tendency for coaches to gravitate towards talent, but one of the things that I would encourage coaches to do is to recognize how to help each player, member of the team, improve. And rather than get caught up in ego, it's really talking about developing a plan for each child to actually make some improvement. And one of the ways we talk about that with coaches is to develop SMART goals, S-M-A-R-T. Standing for something specific for each player, something measurable for each player, something attainable to each player, which will help everybody feel good, something relevant so they know why they're making the improvement, and something time-based where they can check back in with the child, the athlete, to see how they're doing in accomplishing that improvement and making it less about who's the best player on the team and who's making the best improvements.
Good. Now, a lot of kids are afraid to make mistakes. They've got mom and dad in the stands, they've got grandma in the stands. How does a coach help kids relax and play and know that, hey, mistakes are part of the game?
I think it's really important to recognize that we don't learn unless we're making mistakes. So I think one of the most important things that we can teach from an early age is that mistakes are essential. They're not only something that's necessary, but they're essential for how we become better. And part of the way we can take some of the pressure off is to really simulate game scenarios and practices so that we don't make a game or a meet different from the practice event itself. It's impossible to make that difference zero, but the closer we can simulate game situations to practice situations, we increase the comfort level that we have. Another thing that we can do is to have pre-practice rituals that we help kids develop, and those are rituals that they can then do that are meaningful to what they're about to do, that help them prepare for the nervousness before practice just as they would for the nervousness before the big game.
Good. Most coaches, moms and dads, have their own child on the team. That brings a lot of different issues into play. How does a coach make it work for their child and for the whole team?
I think all coaches and all human beings have biases. So the first step is, as a coach, to recognize what is his or her bias and where might it be. So in the case of having your own child be a participant, part of it is to recognize you don't want that to be an advantage to your child, nor do you want it to be a disadvantage to your child. So I think the most important thing to do is to have a good, transparent, open discussion with your child about how that's going to be for him or her, and how you're going to work through that as a coach, and then address those issues as they may come up with the remainder of the team. But first and foremost, it's about taking care of home. Take care of your child and your relationship with your child by not letting it unnecessarily help or hinder their performance.
Now, confidence is a tricky thing. Kids can get down on themselves quickly if shots aren't going in during a game. How does a coach help kids stay upbeat and positive and enjoy the experience, because some days aren't going to go better, aren't going to be worse than others?
Yes, certainly. I think, again, it's the notion that failure is where we learn. Failure instructs us of where we have work to do. And a lot of children think that perfection is the goal, and part of the job is to help reduce the pressure to be perfect. But I also think to go one step further and maybe take some of the pressure off having to be confident. That confident is one of those cherries on top. It's great when we feel it, great when we experience it, but it's not necessary to enjoy the game. Part of it is recognizing what are the skills that I'm bringing to the table, what am I doing really well, and focusing on that as a way of encouraging my continued engagement in the sport itself. If I'm not confident and I make that the goal of achieving confidence, that's where we run into problems. So some of it is taking some of the emphasis off confidence and putting it more on skill development and developing that talent and love for the sport.
Now, with all the different techniques that are used out there with young kids, does positive imagery and deep breathing, do those types of things, are they effective with young athletes?
Absolutely. I think young athletes are as smart as older athletes. Part of the job of a young athlete is to figure out what's relevant to them and what's not relevant to them. And so positive imagery can start the process of helping them focus in on what's really important to them doing their job, and also ruling out the things and ignoring the things that are going to be disruptive and distracting. So I always recommend a positive imagery that is very focused and specific. I try to help kids actually look at things from the first person's perspective. How do I actually see myself doing it through my own eyes? And then I also encourage them to see the visualization from the way someone else would look at them. So they get to actually experience that visualization from two different perspectives. Relaxation breathing is also a fantastic technique. When done properly, it's the diaphragm actually sending a signal to the brain to put the braking system on. The brain likes to do fight or flight when we're in competition, and what the relaxation breathing does is it gives the signal to the brain, hey, let's put the braking system on, let's calm things down. And we want to be able to be at our peak performance as opposed to our hyper-aroused or hyperactive performance.
I like that. That was good. Good comment. A lot of kids show up at practices and they don't have confidence. How does a coach make it work with all the kids and help bring those kids up to feel good about themselves before the season's even started? They seem to be down on themselves maybe.
Yeah, I think knowing where your athlete is step one, and knowing if he or she is down on their performance is the best place to start. And then having a dialogue, getting them to talk about the reasons why they want to play. I think sometimes it's about helping, just as we are as adults wanting to know why we do things, kids want to know that too. And helping them connect with why they are playing, why they chose the sport, why they're playing, what they enjoy about it. Help them focus on the pleasant elements of what they're doing and not just the things that they see as not going as well as possible.
This kind of ties into the question about nerves, but like night before a big game, a lot of kids maybe they can't sleep or they can't eat. Is there any type of message coaches can send the kids home with that night before they come back for the big game the next day?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things to recognize is the goal isn't to eliminate anxiety, it's just to manage it. We have great research dating back over 100 years that actually shows that a moderate amount of anxiety or a moderate amount of butterflies is a good thing. That's where we get our best performance. If we don't have butterflies or we don't have anxiety, we're not caring, we're not invested in what it is that we're setting out to do. Likewise, if we need to breathe in a paper bag just to be able to think straight, we're not going to perform well. So the goal is to put yourself into a medium amount of anxiety. And so part of what I teach student athletes to do is normalize anxiety, universalize anxiety, and to temporize anxiety. And if you take those first three letters of those words, it's N-U-T, nut. So be a nut when it comes to emotions. Normalize the fact that this is a normal, good, healthy thing in balance. Anyone who's preparing for the big game is going to experience it, and it's a temporary feeling. I'm not going to be stuck with this forever. It's a thing I can get over very quickly.
Now, when coaches are instructing kids, what effect does body language and their tone of how they deliver their message have on a youngster who's looking at this coach and looking at how they're behaving as they talk and interact with them?
I think it's incredibly important. It's probably more important than the actual verbal elements of the message. Kids are learning all the time from their peers, they're learning all the time from their role models, and as a coach and a role model, you're going to be looked at for how you're carrying yourself, whether you're winning, whether you're losing, whether somebody is meeting up to the expectations or not, and how you bounce back from adversity. So I think how you stand, how you walk, your hand placement, your eye contact, your nonverbal utterances, under the breath utterances, these are all things that are going to be modeled by kids. So your ability to be resilient in the face of adversity is going to be infectious to how they respond to adversity. So I think it is very important to be a self-monitoring coach, especially with young kids.
So kind of along those lines, when you're working with a child, kids are sensitive. When you're trying to correct them and help them do things the right way and improve, how do you do that without like making the child feel like, oh geez, I screwed up again?
Yeah, I think part of it is to recognize the piece that they did well. So it becomes an important skill for a coach to develop, to recognize what element am I seeing that I was really looking for. I'm looking for hustle, I'm looking for a good work ethic, I'm looking for commitment, I'm looking for a focus and an attention on the task that I can then complement and build off of. So I think it's important to lead with dessert. Give the vegetables and the meat dish at the end, but let's start with dessert, and that helps make sure you have your players' attention and their focus, and also keeps their enthusiasm and commitment.
Now on to concussions. It's on everybody's radar. Have we gone overboard in our fear of concussions where now moms and dads are afraid to sign their kids up for sports?
Yeah, it's the billion, maybe $1 trillion question, and I think the answer is I don't know if we've gone overboard or not, and I don't think really anybody has that answer. I think my impression is that we're drifting towards overreacting because I think we're pinning a lot of bad outcomes on things like football, things like soccer, things where there's a lot of contact in early years of sport. And I think sometimes there are other factors that we're neglecting to pay attention to because we think we found the smoking gun. I do believe that concussions at an early age and with a high degree of frequency are very important to capture, to monitor, and to be very mindful in how we approach recovery and return to activity. But I do think we also want to be careful not to set the impression that this is a life-altering injury. In most cases, it's not. And sometimes I think we give kids and parents the impression that it will be.
What's your biggest concern regarding concussions with all the research you've done and what's going on out there?
I think in spite of what I just said, the big concern for me is that they're going to be minimized or discarded or discounted as important. So even though there's been a great push for education, there's been state laws put in place for education to coaches and parents and players of sport, I still worry that we're going to go the other direction and minimize the importance of capturing these events, minimize the importance of having a very systematic and careful return to activity and return to play process. So that still remains my biggest fear in spite of the fact that I have this slight feeling that we're overreacting in some other ways.
With all the stuff that's out there and all the research you've done, is there like an important piece of information that would be important for, that you'd want volunteer coaches and parents to be aware of that maybe they haven't come across?
I think it's not necessarily something they haven't come across, but just to hit it hard, if you have any doubt, sit them out. That expression started with an NHL initiative several years ago to try to help professional hockey players recognize if they're in doubt about something that happened to them, let's sit them out of the game. And there are several professional sport players that have really persisted in trying to play despite symptoms. I really think that's the most important thing for parents and coaches alike to be mindful of. If you know your child and he or she is not him or herself, sit them out. And so that's the most important thing. And I think along those lines, it's about being very careful about when you return them to play and that you don't do that prematurely.
Now, obviously, a lot of kids, they want to play. They hate missing games. They hate missing practices. A lot of them are going to go to whatever length to hide that they're not feeling well. How, as a coach or a parent, do you, number one, get that across to kids that they have to say something, and number two, how do you recognize that they're hiding something when they're still out there running around?
Yeah, in answer to your first question, it is about establishing a trusting culture. I think part of it is to recognize, I know you want to play. I know everybody here really wants to be on the field, on the court, on the course, and I respect that as your coach. But more important to that, I want a culture of safety here. That doesn't trump anything, or that trumps everything. Your health and safety trumps everything, including the success of this team. So first and foremost, if you're feeling out of sorts, or you know a friend of yours is out of sorts, come tell me. That's really important. And then my job as a coach is to get to know my players so that over time I know when they're not acting up to their normal standards.
Kind of last question for you. If you were talking to a group of moms and dads volunteering to coach, going back to the kind of psychology of working with kids, what would be like the take-home message that you would want them to take with them so they can make those connections with kids and be that coach that kids really love playing for?
I think it's recognizing that they're kids first, that they're there to enjoy themselves and be children and to explore something in their lives that they really haven't had a chance to explore yet in many cases. And so they're going to be enthusiastic, join in their enthusiasm, understand their enthusiasm, or also recognize if they lack that enthusiasm. Sometimes one of the hardest things we do is to help people be able to say, this isn't my cup of tea. I was, sort of pushed into doing this sport and it doesn't fit for me. Great. That's very important information, but kids come first. How are they responding? Do they like this? Do they enjoy it? How do I promote that? And how do I change it if there's no way to really mix oil and water here?
That was awesome. You nailed everything. You've done this before.
I've had some, but
no, that was great. Is there any topic or question that you think would be important to add in from what you've covered that?
I don't think so. I mean, I know I had a misspeak in there about, it's not.
Oh, that's just a natural. That wasn't anything.
That can be worked with, but yeah, there is one part in there where I know I was a little bit off in how I started phrasing it and then had to backtrack on it, but.
No, I didn't catch anything that was,
okay.
I'd be like, oh, we got to redo that one again. So I thought it sounded, seriously really sounded good. So.
Good. Happy to
Appreciate
do
it
it.
very much.
Yeah, I hope it's valuable to you.
No,
And
that's